The last number in Fantasia is a combination of two pieces of music utterly different in construction and mood, whose synergism was intended as a dramatic example of the struggle between the profane and the sacred. The first is Night on Bald Mountain, a tone poem by Modest Mussorgsky. The second is Ave Maria by Franz Schubert. In this arrangement, the end of the first piece blends without pause into the second, so that the bells heralding the morning in Night on Bald Mountain seem to be the bells calling the faithful to worship in the Ave Maria. Mussorgsky first sketched Night on Bald Mountain in 1860 for solo piano and orchestra, then rewrote it in 1868, 1871, and 1875. It was never performed during the composer's lifetime. In 1882, Mussorgsky's friend, Rimsky-Korsakov, revised and reorchestrated the work and conducted that version at its first performance in 1886. It was the Rimsky-Korsakov arrangement that Leopold Stokowski recorded for Fantasia in 1939, but when Erwin Kostel conducted the digital recording of the Fantasia soundtrack in 1982, he used Mussorgsky's own, more savage orchestration. The German lyrics for Schubert's song were translated from Sir Walter Scott's The Lady of the Lake. The English text was written especially for Fantasia by Rachel Field. Bald Mountain is Mount Triglav, an eminence near Kiev in southern Russia. Here, according to Slavonic mythology, evil spirits gather on Walpurgis Night, the equivalent of our Halloween, to worship the devil. The pattern of the music and the animated pictures is the pattern of the witches' sabbath itself. First, Chernabog, the god of evil and death, appears out of the top of Bald Mountain. He gathers to him the evil ones, witches, demons, vampires, and the skeletons of corpses not buried in consecrated ground. They dance furiously as his satanic majesty condemns them by giant handfuls to the fiery pit inside the mountain. It is his perverse pleasure to transform some of these demons into animals before throwing them into the flames. And he is reaching for more evil ones to play with when the bells heralding the morning drive the ghosts back to their graveyard, the evil spirits back to the town, and the cringing Chernabog back into Bald Mountain. These same morning bells that make the devil fold his wings around himself and again become a mountaintop call the faithful to the worship of the God of love. A procession of figures carrying lights is seen faintly through the drifting morning fog at the base of the mountain. The procession crosses a bridge, their lights reflected in the water below. As the solemn file ascends a hill, Gothic tree forms emerge from the fog, suggesting the sanctuary of a church. The procession passes along the edge of a quiet pool. In the distance, we see a pulsating light that gradually assumes a form suggesting a cathedral window. The camera glides through the window, comes out into a pre-dawn sky, and a sunburst fills the sky with color as the choir sings the last chords of the Ave Maria. To captivate our varied and worldwide audiences of all ages, said Walt Disney, the nature and treatment of the fairy tale, the legend, the myth, have to be elementally simple. Good and evil, the antagonists of all great drama in some guise, must be believably personalized. The moral ideas common to all humanity must be upheld. The conflict between good and evil have been Disney's primary theme since Mickey Mouse first confronted Peg-Leg Pete. The contrast of Mussorgsky's violent Night on Bald Mountain with Schubert's tranquil Ave Maria as the conclusion of Fantasia was his most ambitious statement of that theme. The defect of this conclusion is that the evil was expressed so much more effectively than the good, a frequent problem in all forms of art. The great strength of this segment is that its personification of evil in Vladimir Tytla's animation of Chernabog, the Black God, or Satan, was, and remains today, the highest point yet achieved in the art of animation. All of Disney's best work is an allegorical representation of the triumph of life and hope over the powers of despair and death. Death is personified as the Wicked Witch in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the hunters in Bambi, Teti-Tati, the impresario who did not believe in miracles, in The Whale Who Wanted to Sing at the Met, Cruella de Vil, the villainess of 101 Dalmatians, and Maleficent, the wicked enchantress of Sleeping Beauty. Despair is depicted in the scenes when Monstro the Whale in Pinocchio, the mad elephant cage for Dumbo's mother, the destructive stepmother in Cinderella, and the grotesque and menacing Tugly Wood in which Alice gets lost in Wonderland. But none of these representations had the mythic force of Chernabog, who is the god of evil in Slavonic mythology. At the basis of Slavonic mythology, we find the primitive dualism which had its source in the opposition between light, the creative force, and darkness, the destructive force, the New Larousse Encyclopedia of Mythology tells us. This elemental opposition gave birth to two divine images which are found among the peoples of the western branch of the Slavonic world, Bielobog and Chernabog. The composition of their names reveals their characters. Bielobog is made up of the adjective bieli, which means light, and the noun bog, which means God. The adjective Cherny, on the other hand, means black. Thus, there is a white God, God of light and day, and a black God, God of the shadows and of night, a God of good and a God of evil, opposed one to the other. The Ukrainians still say, "May the black God exterminate you." This dualism fit perfectly Disney's dictum that the nature and treatment of the myth have to be elementally simple. However, as a Christian artist, he chose to place in opposition to the god of evil not Bielobog, the pagan god of good, pictured in Slavonic mythology as an old man with a white beard dressed in white, but instead a procession of worshippers seeking the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary, Mother of the Christian God. To supervise the animation of this segment, and personally to animate the god of evil, Walt Disney chose Vladimir Tytla, who had previously animated the Seven Dwarfs, most memorably Grumpy in Snow White, the passionate Stromboli in Pinocchio, and the menacing giant in The Brave Little Tailor. "I'm Ukrainian," said Tytla, a gentle New Yorker whose black mustache made him look like a fierce Cossack. "My father was a Ukrainian cavalryman. On all my animation, I tried to do some research and look into the background of each character. I studied Italians for weeks to do Stromboli, but I could relate immediately to this character. Ukrainian folklore is based on Chernabog. Mussorgsky used terms I could understand." The Disney version of Night on Bald Mountain follows closely the program appended to the original printed score of Mussorgsky's tone poem.
A subterranean din of unearthly voices, appearance of the spirits of darkness, followed by that of Chernabog, glorification of the Black God, the Black Mass, the revelry of the witches' Sabbath, interrupted from afar by the bell of a little church, whereupon the spirits of evil disperse. Dawn breaks.
The Disney visualization of Chernabog, however, sprang from an inspirational pencil sketch by Albert Herder. Herder, a middle-aged Swiss bachelor who had been an animator on Mutt and Jeff in the 1920s, never animated for Disney, but he had a fantastic visual imagination, expressed entirely in pencil sketches. So Disney paid him to sit by himself all day and fill sheet after sheet with drawings that would inspire Disney's other artists. The demon on top of Bald Mountain was his idea, said story director Dick Humer. A simple pencil sketch showing the demon up there unfolding his wings suggested the whole thing to us. To design his Witch's Sabbath, however, Walt Disney went outside his studio for talent and hired Kai Nielsen, one of the finest contemporary illustrators of myths and fairy tales. East of the Sun, West of the Moon was probably his best-known work. Wilfred Jackson, who had directed one of the greatest Disney cartoon shorts, The Band Concert, directed this segment. Jackson shot live action of Bela Lugosi, the screen's famous Dracula, for Tytla to study for the movements of the devil, but the way that Lugosi unfolded his wings and gestured was not the way that Tytla saw those movements in his imagination. So, after Lugosi left, Tytla had the skinny Jackson bare his chest and move the way that Tytla directed him to move for the motion picture camera. I even did the hocus pocus thing with the little guys on my hands, said Jackson, alluding to Chernabog's fistfuls of flames that changed into demons and beasts. Looking at this live action, at three-dimensional models of Chernabog that the character model department had sculpted, and deep into his imagination, Bill Tytla animated the devil. It was one of the greatest things I've ever seen in my life, said Mark Davis, himself one of the finest draftsman animators in the history of art. I think that was the high point. The whole thing comes to life. The moment of fear when the bell begins to toll stands out, but I like the shape of this whole thing. It was enormous. But you see, this could only happen at the Disney studio because it wasn't only Bill. You had Kai Nielsen, who sketched this thing up, and it was pretty much as it was on the screen. You had sculptors who made models, and you had Bill Tytla, who was just right at that moment to do something like this. He had all the art in the world in him at that moment. He died 1,000 deaths after he left the studio. He never really belonged in any other place, so I like to remember Bill doing this picture, the right time and the right place for everything he had to offer. Personal responsibilities made it necessary for Tytla to leave the Disney studio and return to the East in 1943, and until he died on December 29, 1969, at the age of 64, he worked in New York, first for Paramount, where he directed Popeye, Little Lulu, and Little Audrey cartoons, and later producing television commercials. When this writer urged him to attend the first World Retrospective of Animation Cinema, held in conjunction with the 1967 World's Fair in Montreal, Tytla asked, "Do you think they'll know who I am?" He was astonished to receive an ovation at Expo 67 from colleagues, critics, and filmgoers from all over the world. He was the first animator, as Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson later acknowledged, to achieve strong emotions and convincing acting with the human figure, but he didn't know that so many people were aware of what he had accomplished, or that so many viewed Bald Mountain as the peak of Disney's achievement. Yet Disney had been worried, when he began story conferences on the Mussorgsky composition, that he was overreaching himself. "What I'm thinking about is this," he said. "We have done cartoon and comic bats and cats, and we have used graves and spooks from graves. It's quite obvious there's nothing new about it. In this thing, we are attempting to do something bigger than we are able to handle, to tell the truth. We want to go beyond those obvious things we've done. We're getting all mixed up here, and nothing is coming out of it. It's just an attempt to do something big, but it's falling flat. We have to have more than just a bunch of pictures on the screen." Disney first treated the theme of a Walpurgis Night, or Witch's Sabbath, or Halloween, when the spirits of the dead come out of their graves at midnight and revel until dawn, in 1929 in his first silly symphony, The Skeleton Dance. But that first attempt was strictly comic, with no suggestion that the skeletons were the spirits of those not buried in consecrated ground, and with cartoon and comic bats and cats that were not very convincing as symbols of evil. "Oh hell, they have always used cats to symbolize evil," snapped Disney at one story conference, rejecting black cats as a story element in 9 on Bald Mountain. Instead, to the demonic music of Mussorgsky, the Disney studio animated nothing less than Satan and the other evil spirits who roam through the world seeking the ruin of souls. Because of Kai Nielsen, these demons were strikingly well designed. Because of Terrell Stapp and Charles Payzant, their careers through the sulphurous air were eerily choreographed. Because of the animation supervision of Tytla and the actual animation of Tytla, William N. Shaw, Don Patterson, and others, they moved with the horrid realism of creatures in a nightmare. Witches riding goats, witches riding wild boars, and ghosts of warriors riding the skeletons of horses and cows. The souls, and often the skeletons, of those not buried in consecrated ground. Also such living humans as have sold their souls to the devil, as one old book describes the damned. Special animation effects and special camera effects add further to the expressiveness of this invocation of damnation and evil. Such an elementary device as ripple glass makes wispy ghosts seem to writhe in the wind as they rise from their graves, trailing rotting shrouds and tattered winding sheets. Other effects are the result of sophisticated and painstaking labor. Daniel McManus was given some scenes in which flames dancing on Chernabog's hand would metamorphose into the shapes of the damned. They should give the impression of being female forms, he was told, but if they look like women, they're no good, and if they don't look like women, they're no good. Such plausibly impossible assignments were what animation was for. McManus animated fire that appears to be taking the shapes of 3 women, then changes into the shapes of a wolf, a pig, and a goat. These 3 animals change into 6 demons. The devil turns his hand over, then back, and the demons scramble around to keep on the top side of the hand. Chernabog closes his hand on them anyway, crushing the demons. When he opens his hand again, they have turned to 6 flames. The special effects animation fits with Tytla's powerful drawing and animation of Chernabog's hands, the hands for which Wilfred Jackson's were the models. A moment later, when the devil lowers his hands into the flames inside Bald Mountain, the flames burst up in 4 accented movements, synchronized with 4 big ascents in the music. As the demon stands on the crater's edge, the colors change on the music phrase. Director Wilfred Jackson had come a long way from the days when he played his harmonica for Steamboat Willie, while Up Iwerks fitted his animation of Mickey Mouse to the accents in the music. The next movement of Fantasia brought sound and sight together in a way never before possible. The sound, as Leopold Stokowski afterward described it, is an extremely powerful chord, played by all the horns, trumpets, trombones, tuba, with deep foundation tones by timpani, bass drum, and tam-tam. Above this chord, all the string and woodwind instruments play a rapid rushing down passage, beginning very high and ending with the lowest tones of the double basses. These downward rushing tones should sound like an avalanche, beginning loud and increasing in tonal volume the lower they go. In the concert hall, this is impossible to achieve because the instruments have more strength of tone in their higher registers than in their lower, so that no matter how much the players try to increase the volume as the tones become deeper, exactly the opposite happens. The volume of the tone becomes less. In Fantasia, we were able for the first time to achieve the ideal in this music, increasing the tone as the scale passage descended, because recording for motion pictures puts techniques at our disposal whereby the impossible can sometimes be achieved. When these techniques are further developed, the whole idea of impossible will be forever set aside, because everything will be possible in the tonal sphere. The sight, the complement to this passage in the visual sphere, is the climactic moment of Satan's revel. Chernabog has been casting fiends into the flames, and we have been looking down with him into the bottomless pit. Now suddenly, we are looking up at this mountainous prince of darkness, as he transforms all these evil spirits into one shooting yellow flame, which he thrusts like a lightning bolt into hell, whence it lights up his loins. In the interval of silence following this avalanche of sound, the devil reaches into the pit to scoop the accursed up again, and he is stretching down when the tolling of a bell disturbs him. He glances up.
Where's the hateful sound coming from? No matter. Go at them again.
But the bell tolls a second time, and he raises one arm, as if to ward off a blow. The bell tolls a third time, and the devil cowers, as if the sound were of a frequency to break his eardrums. He puts his hand over his eyes. He lowers his other hand in agony that devils are said to feel at the sound of a bell. Defeated, the devil folds his wings and becomes again the peak of Bald Mountain. In spite of the helplessness and horror inspired by the dark forces which lurk in and behind our world and have power to estrange it, wrote Wolfgang Kaiser in The Grotesque in Art and Literature, the truly artistic portrayal effects a secret liberation. The darkness has been sighted, the ominous powers discovered, the incomprehensible forces challenged. And thus we arrive at a final interpretation of the grotesque, an attempt to invoke and subdue the demonic aspects of the world. When Bill Tytla was asked by his writer how he approached the animation of the devil on Bald Mountain, he drew himself up like an actor getting back into an old role.
I imagined that I was as big as a mountain and made of rock, and yet I was feeling and moving,
Tytla answered. Then he dropped the devil's posture and became a man again. You see? He had demonstrated his Chernabog, but it was still a mystery how he had managed to convey the feelings he imagined through a series of drawings projected on a screen at a rate of 24 frames a second. That is the mystery of animation. Tytla shared with Disney an overwhelming empathy, a fellow feeling with all creation that was almost Francisian. You know, he once said, we approach those things with a great deal of emotion. He could identify with Doc, Dopey, Sleepy, Sneezy, Happy, Bashful, and Grumpy, with Stromboli, Pinocchio's puppet master, the giant conquered by Mickey in The Brave Little Tailor, Little Dumbo, and the devil himself, and make us feel their emotions. What Stokowski said of Disney, the producer of animation, was also true of Tytla, his greatest animator. His imagination, humor, insight, sense of design, and ability to enter into the life of feeling of any man or animal, tree or stone, and make us feel with him, are the delight of millions of children and grown-up children all over the world. One day, in December 1938, while working on the Ave Maria section of Fantasia, Walt Disney got a little riled up and said as much about his hopes for his medium as he ever did. He and his story staff had just listened to a record of Schubert's song, and they had looked at the sketches on the storyboards showing pilgrims going to church in the early morning carrying candles. Now, one of the storymen said, I always wondered if we're taking full advantage of the cartoon medium with a picture like this. This is not the cartoon medium, Walt snapped. It should not be limited to cartoons. We have worlds to conquer here. This was Walt Disney, the risk-taking adventurer, speaking. Among Disney's competitors that year, Max Fleischer received an Academy Award nomination for a cartoon called Hunky and Spunky, but Disney got the other 4 nominations and won the Oscar for his animation of the Monroe Leaf Robert Lawson juvenile bestseller, Ferdinand the Bull. MGM was animating the old comic strip Captain and the Kids. The stars of Warner Brothers cartoons were Porky Pig and Daffy Duck. Walter Lantz was still making cartoons with Disney's 1927 character creation, Oswald the Rabbit, and Paul Terry, who dominated film animation when Disney came to Hollywood in 1923, finally produced a cartoon in color 6 years after Disney did, a version of Jack and the Beanstalk called String Bean Jack. This was the professional atmosphere in which Disney was planning the Ave Maria as, explained the Fantasia program, an emotional relief to audiences tense from the shock of Mussorgsky's malignant music and its grim visualization. In a universal language, music, the Ave Maria sings of peace and hope and life, Disney's program continued. Schubert himself said it was written as an act of spontaneous devotion springing from an overpowering emotion. Crossing the natural bridge of music from Bald Mountain to Ave Maria, far away in the dim light of first dawn, is seen a band of hooded pilgrims carrying torches. They move through avenues of tall-trunked trees. As the light increases, the trees take on natural Gothic forms, until the forest seems to have become the interior of a cathedral, immense, stately, and beautiful beyond the dreams of human architects. To the objection that such a conception did not take full advantage of the animation medium, Walt replied, "The best answer I can think of is this, that we've got an hour and 45 minutes of picture, and we're doing beautiful things with beautiful music. We're doing comic things, fantastic things, and it can't all be the same. It's an experimental thing, and I'm willing to experiment on it. We've got more in this medium than making people laugh. We love to make people laugh, but I think we can do both. This covers 4 minutes in our picture, and it's going to be 4 precious minutes when we're through. The beauty we can get from control color and the music and everything we use here will be worth it. This stuff means more. It's richer. It's like a painting. People go all over Europe to look at cathedrals, and when you go in, they don't look like this. You don't see the beauty there. You have to go back and squint your eyes, or you have to see it at a certain hour or a certain minute of the day. This will give you all those minutes together," said Dick Humer, getting into the spirit of the thing. "It's only 4 minutes," Walt continued. "I'm looking at this and Claire de Lune as a chance to, as a contrast to what we have before and after it." Claire de Lune was later cut from Fantasia, though the visual complement created was included in Make Mine Music in 1946, with a popular choral ballad called Blue Bayou. I don't want us to get too much animation in this. It doesn't need it, and animators are scarce. It gives us a chance to get the stuff out, and look what it gives the background a chance to do. And in fact, the Ave Maria was planned as the greatest showcase ever provided for the background painter's talents and skills, supported by dramatic camera angles from the layout man and special photographic images from the effects animators and the optical wizards in the camera department. The sequence begins with a spectacular cross dissolve. Tytla had animated the devil in medium close-up, folding his wings around himself and metamorphosing once more into the top of Bald Mountain. Now the camera trucks back until the screen is filled with drifting fog. The shot was designed for the Academy Award-winning multi-plane camera, which gives the illusion of depth to the flat character drawings and background paintings of two-dimensional animation. Of the more than 11,200 feet of film shot for Fantasia, 3,500 feet were multi-plane footage, more than in Snow White and Pinocchio combined. The capability of the camera is best shown in scenes like this, where it seems to envelop Bald Mountain and its valley in three-dimensional space. These scenes called for quite a bit of processing, meaning, of course, the double and triple printing, and the process dissolves from one scene to another, and also dissolves within the scenes themselves, wrote Ed Gershman, later a founding member of UPA, the studio that produced Mr. Magoo and Gerald McBoing. Gershman worked on the innovative Ave Maria and found that much of this was mostly experimental, not only for the Disney studio, but also for Technicolor. Lights move into the scene from camera left and across the scene to center right, alternately obscured and revealed by the drifting fog. The procession crosses a bridge, but the figures were still obscured by fog. Fog and mist are particularly difficult to animate. You can't put a pencil line around them, but greater animation challenges are to come. The lights reflect in the water below the bridge, the halation forming across in the reflection. The ripples in the water break up the reflection. Now in a vast panorama stretching across 118 feet of film, each foot of film contains 16 frames. The figures in the procession become visible through the fog. Gothic tree forms emerge from the fog as the procession climbs the hill. The light suggests the stained glass windows and the tree forms resemble the arched sanctuary of a church. Still in long shot, the pilgrims pass along the edge of a quiet pool. The camera trucks down to the reflections in the water, then moves ahead of the reflections so the scene ends on a dark, quiet part of the water. Some of the closest animation ever attempted by any animator in the studio was the animation of the nuns in the long pan, wrote Gershman. In animation, the slower the movement, the more drawings there are, and the closer together each successive drawing of the same figure is. So close was this animation, Gershman wrote, that the difference in the width of a pencil line was more than enough to cause jitters, not only to the animation, but to everyone connected with the sequence. Jitters, also called strobing, occur when the successive images of a progressive movement was not fused by the persistence of vision, but appeared to move as a series of short staccato jumps, in short, to jitter. Again and again, Walt was dissatisfied with the way the Ave Maria looked, and he ordered expensive and time-consuming retakes. The optimism and self-confidence with which he had begun Fantasia was being assaulted by the hard facts of a world at war. The European market that was his profit margin was cut off from the expensive Pinocchio and would be cut off from all his pictures until the war ended. By the summer of 1940, it was clear that Pinocchio, which had been released in February, did not recover its $2.6 million cost, and the difficult Bambi would not be finished until sometime in 1942. Now, much more was riding on the experimental Fantasia than Disney had intended, and yet his reaction to these dire circumstances was not to get it out, but to get it perfect. Ultimately, all decisions at the Walt Disney Studio were made, or were subject to review by Walt Disney, as this memo to his co-workers from Wilfred Jackson, director of Night on Bald Mountain and Ave Maria, clearly shows. In a conversation with Walt today, it develops that he is doubtful as to whether we should have a Madonna in Ave Maria at all, wrote Jackson. referring to Walt's original plan to show a Madonna in the sky at the end of the film. If possible, it would be best to shoot the Madonna separately from the sky, so she may be double printed in or left out at will after the shooting is done. In case this is not practical, we must either get a decision from Walt as to whether she is in or out before the scene is shot, or else shoot this part of the scene two ways, once with the Madonna and clouds, and once with only the clouds. Gail Papineau will be responsible for contacting Walt on this matter before the scene is shot. If the sky with the underlighting on the clouds and the sunburst is designed while I'm away, Ray Lockram will check directly with Walt and get Walt's approval on the design and setup before the scene is shot. Walt wants to make sure we have a good finish for this sequence and for the concert feature, and that this sunburst sky will be a decorative and colorful one. On August 2nd, 1940, 6 artists and a secretary sat with Walt while the Ave Maria reel was run. "Where do we get all that jitter in there?" asked Walt. "It looks like it is from inking and painting," said Papineau. "It's a lousy job," said Walt. "We can't use it. Both the lights and the figures jitter. We can't have it in this thing. It looks like the speed of the characters is a little fast, too." For the rest of the meeting of an hour and a half, the 7 artists discussed how to fix the problem. The solutions would take time and be expensive, but Walt was set on getting on the screen what he had seen in his mind the previous January, when he rejected some story sketches, saying, "Pretty scenes aren't going to carry this. It must be like a spectacle on the stage. It can't be too literal in its interpretation. It must glorify the sacred side as Bear Mountain does the profane side. It is too subtle this way. There must be a bigness to it, to fit the way we expect to present this music." The last scene in the Ave Maria visualization is probably the longest scene in an animated film up to that time. 217 feet! It is a long shot that begins on a velvety black surface with a pulsating light shining in deep space. The camera trucks toward the light, through those tree forms suggesting the interior of a cathedral, through the window, and out into the pre-dawn sky. The sunburst fills the sky with color as the scene and the film fade out. In an early story conference that dealt with combining Nine on Bald Mountain with Ave Maria, Walt Disney said, "The forces of good on one side and the evil on the other is what I'm trying to see in this thing." Deems Taylor described the procession in the Ave Maria as a vast hope of worshippers of the God of Light, in contradistinction to the worshippers of the Prince of Darkness on Bald Mountain. "On moves the procession, on and on," he wrote, "until we reach the end and emerge in a blaze of morning light. Once again, the powers of life and hope have triumphed over the hosts of death and despair." The story of how that last shot was put on film says the final word on the spirit of adventure with which Disney and his staff approached Fantasia. When Disney told his special effects artists what he wanted for Fantasia's last scene, there were only a few weeks remaining before the Fantasia premiere, and there was no animation camera that could move slowly and continuously enough to make that shot. But Walt wanted it. In Disney Animation, The Illusion of Life, Disney animators Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson told how Walt got it. "A couple of cameramen, 2 or 3 carpenters, 2 inventors, and an artist tackled the project," wrote Thomas and Johnston. Walt had the carpenters knock the seats out of the end of the soundstage, which was at least 45 feet across, shut down the recording sessions, and he told them to go ahead. They built a horizontal camera crane that would photograph artwork painted on panes of glass 3 or 4 feet wide. The camera was placed on a carriage that could be moved along a track. The panes of glass were mounted on movable stands so that they could be shifted out of the way as the camera moved through the paintings of the forest, through the paintings of the window-shaped light, and onto the painting of the sunburst beyond. The cameramen were quickly calibrating the camera moves in order to control the real light and do away with the reflections on the glass. They shot day and night for 6 days and 6 nights, and the carpenters, the inventors, and the artists stood by, because they had designed and built the contraption, and if anything went wrong, they could probably fix it quickest. The only time they had a break, wrote Thomas and Johnston, was the one night of the week Walt played badminton on the stage from 7 to 10 in the evening. When the crew finished the job, they fell into bed exhausted and rested while the film was being processed at the lab. The next day they all looked at the exposed scene. The scene was beautiful, it didn't jerk or wobble a bit, and the scene was unusable. The wrong lens had been in the camera. In addition to the beautiful artwork, the camera had photographed the camera track, the stands that held the artwork, and even some of the workers. It had to be done over, wrote Thomas and Johnston. The deadline was now only days away, but this was not the deadline for camera work or for the lab or for the answer print. This was the premiere showing of the picture in New York.
What?
No picture had ever been premiered with the last 200 feet missing. The filming had to be perfect this time. The crew shot for 3 days and nights, stopping for a brief rest during the badminton games, then back to the figures on the floor and the careful moves. All was going well, coffee was keeping the crew awake, and a quiet determination had settled over the whole process. And then came an earthquake. The line of wooden stands holding the glass panes rocked, but the glass painted with Fantasia's final scenes did not break or even crack. When the tremor was over and another did not follow, the crew checked its equipment. It all seemed okay, but if it wasn't, if the track wasn't straight, if anything had changed, and they went ahead and finished the scene, and it turned out to jump or jerk, the ending of Fantasia would be ruined, and now there would be no time to reshoot it before the premiere. The next morning they started all over again. This time Disney canceled his badminton and barred everyone but that crew from the soundstage. They rolled the camera back to start, put in new film, and double-checked to make sure that this time they had the right lens. They finished shooting with 1 day to spare. The film was rushed off to the process lab. It was perfect. The day of Fantasia's premiere, the crew that shot the final scene took a week's vacation, and somebody else sped the end of Fantasia to the airport. At the airport, a motorcycle roared up. Before he had flown to New York for the premiere, Disney had given last-minute instructions for some important changes on the soundtrack. At the other side of the continent, the end of his picture and the entire last reel of his soundtrack was being put aboard the same plane. Walt Disney was always willing to be lucky. The airplane was not grounded, it did not crash, it landed in New York with 4 hours to spare before the premiere. As soon as the film arrived at the Broadway theater, it was spliced onto the end of the picture. If this had been the conventional composite of sound and picture, the sound could not have been cut in without destroying its balance. The track for Fantasound was separate, however, so the 11th hour edition worked just fine. The way that Fantasound sounded was soon to be a legend. War shortages quickly made it impossible to obtain the equipment needed for further installations, and Fantasia with stereophonic sound had to be abandoned completely in 1941. Before that happened, however, at least one 7-year-old child begged his father to drive his mother and him the 93 miles from their home in rural Illinois to the Wilson Theater in Chicago, a legitimate theater wired for Fantasound, so that they could hear Fantasia the way that Walt Disney had intended it to be heard. The church bells, whose pure sound reached the devil at the top of Bald Mountain, sounded at the rear of the theater so realistically that the child turned around in his seat. All he saw was the rest of the audience turning around to stare at the theater's rear wall. And then his 7-year-old ears were dazzled as the sound of the Ave Maria chorus started at the rear of the theater and slowly and powerfully advanced to the screen speakers to join the solo voice. It was as if the spirits of the pilgrim choristers were in procession up the side aisles of the theater. Chills went up his spine, an experience that was repeated in 1982 when he went to the premiere of the 42-year-old Fantasia with its new digitally recorded Dolby stereophonic soundtrack at the Theater of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in Beverly Hills. Now Erwin Kostel was conducting the Tschaikowsky arrangements, and again he felt himself in the midst of a pilgrim chorus. It was the effect that Disney had been striving for at that December 1938 meeting on the Ave Maria when he told his story staff, "Of course we're taking a chance with this, but I don't feel scared about it. We've tied 7 or 8 shorts together and it's too much, we know that. And this definitely has an effect. You can't definitely tell until you've put it in there, but I think it has the right effect. I feel in Snow White we should have had something like this, something a little slower. I knew they kept cutting that prayer of Snow White's, and I would like to have been slower with that, but there was that pressure everywhere. You've got to keep moving." And then we came to the coffin scene. I would like to have run that a little longer. People like those things. Before we finished Snow White, I was talking to Charlie Chaplin about it, and he said, "Don't be afraid to let your audience wait for a few things in the picture. Don't be afraid to let your tempo go slow here and there." Well, I thought he did it too much, because I used to get itchy from watching his pictures. But it's the truth. They appreciate things more when you don't fire them too fast. The conversation moved on to other things, but then Walt came back to tempo saying, "Excuse me if I get a little riled up on this stuff, because it's a continual fight around the place to get away from slapping somebody on the fanny or having somebody swallow something. So whenever it comes up, I'm ready. It's going to take time to get ourselves up to the point where we can really get some humor in our stuff, rather than just belly laughs, and get the beauty in it, rather than just a flashy postcard. It takes time to do that, but I think we will." Before they were through, Walt Disney, Leopold Stokowski, and their co-workers had created an entire animated concert called Fantasia to take full advantage of the animation medium. On its release in 1940, at the beginning of World War II, and at least a decade before film was widely recognized as an art form worth preserving, it might have seemed vainglorious to many when Disney told Time magazine that he expected Fantasia to run for years, perhaps even after I am gone. Disney is gone now, but Fantasia, his most exciting adventure, seems more gloriously alive with each passing year. The end. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for joining me on this magical journey in reading Walt Disney's Fantasia by Disney historian John Culhane in celebration of Fantasia's 80th anniversary. And now everyone, let's have one more round of applause for Walt Disney, Leopold Stokowski, Deems Taylor, and and all the other artists and musicians who worked tirelessly to create this visual masterpiece that we all know and love as Fantasia. This one's for them. I do sincerely hope you all enjoyed yourselves in watching these videos. I'll see you all again real soon with another project that I hope you'll love as well. Until then, this is Son of Herodotus. Stay safe, my friends, and take care of yourselves. Happy reading, everybody!
I wish to thank you for everything that you've taught me, Master Yen said. I don't know how I would have ever gotten through this project without your help, teachings, and guidance. And now I'm looking forward to get started on the second one, Fantasia 2000, which John Culhane also wrote about.
Patience. Your apprenticeship is now complete, but your adventure is just beginning. There will always be more to explore and create here.
Maybe you're right, Master Yen said. I'll wait till the time comes. But until then, I've got other projects that need my attention. Don't want to keep my fans waiting. Thank you again, Master Yen said. I look forward to the day when our paths will cross again.
In the meantime, farewell.